What's up, boys? Quickly, I just want to make sure everything's working because before it wasn't working. Let me double check on this.
What's up, boys?
Yep, we're all good. All right. Breaking news. Really, really crazy news day for UFC 311. We got a new main event. The new main event is going to be Islam Makhachev versus Renato Moicano. This is definitely completely out of left field. Wasn't expecting this at all, obviously. And once there were some rumors that Armin may pull out due to an injury. I thought it could have been Charles. Would have been very, very short notice. Tough to cut all that weight, but I thought it could have been Charles. Maybe they scrapped the whole uh, championship belt fight. I don't know. It was going to be very interesting to see what they did, but they decided to go with Moicano. Moicano's on a little bit of a win streak. He is coming off a really impressive win over BSD, but this is going to be a very, very tough fight for Moicano. Um, uh, I think Islam will most likely win. I would give him about a 90 to 95% chance. Obviously, it is a fight. Anything could happen. So I don't want to say completely 100% chance, but very likely Islam would win. But there are some positives for Moicano. Obviously, he is on a pretty good win streak. He does have a lot of skill. But really, when Moicano's at his best, he's on the ground. He has a tremendous ability to utilize great jiu-jitsu, has a great ability to find positions over a lot of guys. In his last fight versus BSD, he was able to get top position, scramble really nicely into dominant positions, and he was able to find that finish essentially in round one. And it ended up happening a little bit later, but the finish was essentially caused by his round one damage on the ground, which was very impressive over a really talented guy in BSD. Some other things that Moicano does well is on the feet, he does have a good amount of length. He does have a decent ability to strike out there utilizing that length. But for the most part, I would say his best abilities are on the ground. And I do think his best chance to win this fight probably would be to get on the ground and somehow get top position for extended periods of time over Islam Makhachev, which would be a very, very difficult thing to do. Um, but how I think this matchup is going to go is I think Islam is actually going to be willing to stay on the feet a little bit longer than he might have otherwise would have wanted to or would have been willing to do in the past. I do think there's a very big advantage for Islam on the feet versus Moicano. As I said, Moicano is definitely decently skilled on the feet, but he's not really athletic. He doesn't have that TKO power or KO power. And I do think there is a lot of holes on the feet for Moicano. He does get hit quite a bit as well, and maybe that's something that Islam looks to exploit. On the feet, I do think he could find a finish there. If Islam wants to take the fight to the ground, I also think he's going to have a lot of success that way. It seems like he's going to be a lot bigger than Moicano, at least in terms of muscle mass and in terms of strength. So I do think he's going to be able to have his way for the most part on the ground as well. As I did say, though, Moicano does have a really good scrambling ability. He does have great jiu-jitsu. He is really, really good on the ground and has been on the ground against some really good guys and had a lot of success. So I do think there is a chance that Moicano can have some success on the ground. But for the most part, I think this is Islam's fight. Whatever he really wants to do in order to find a finish, I think he'll be successful in doing so. One thing I do want to note, though, is because this is on very, very short notice and because Islam is a little bit defensively minded at times on the feet, I do think this fight can go a little bit longer than people expect. Right now, Islam is a minus 1,000, minus 1,500 favorite over Moicano. A lot of people are expecting him to get a first or second round finish over Moicano because I think the consensus is, and obviously I would agree with this as well, Islam is a way better fighter than Moicano is. Um, but I do think, based on those factors that I mentioned, that he's a little bit risk averse at times, and also the fact that Islam is a little bit defensively minded on the feet. I do think we could possibly see a little bit of a longer fight here. And my official prediction for this matchup would be Islam to win by a third, maybe even fourth round TKO. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets a finish earlier. Obviously, I wouldn't be surprised if he does find a submission. But I would say the most likely outcome, in my opinion at least, is a third round TKO victory for Islam Makhachev. But yeah, that was crazy. Definitely very crazy. Um, Really, I'm still excited for this main event. Obviously, I would have preferred Islam versus Armin. Armin was the legitimate number one contender. Obviously, was extremely talented, great wrestler, had a lot of abilities on the feet, very explosive, which I thought could have possibly been some sort of an X factor for Armin, possibly finding an early TKO or KO. Although I didn't think it was likely, I thought Islam would have beat Armin as well. I did think that explosion, the wrestling, and the overall versatility that Armin did pose could possibly be some sort of an X factor, make the fight a little bit more exciting. But at the end of the day, I think Islam would have beat Armin, and in this new fight, I think Islam is also going to beat Moicano. Although I will say, I definitely am pulling for Moicano. He is on a decent fight win streak, which he does have going for him. I do think he probably would have beat Benil Dariush, and if he beat Dariush, maybe he would need one more fight, or maybe not. Maybe he would have gotten a title shot anyway. So this is definitely very good news for him, for Moicano. Hopefully for him, he does win. But as I said, I don't think it's likely whatsoever. I think Islam's probably going to run away with this fight, although it could look a little bit slow early on. But eventually, in the third or fourth round, I do think Islam's going to be able to find that finish. Um, but uh, but anyways, sorry about that. But let's take a look at the rest of this card. So I mean, a lot of fights I already made videos about from this card. Marab versus Umar, that should be an interesting one. Obviously, they have a beef. And in my prediction, I think Marab's going to be able to win this by decision. My reasoning behind that is I just think Marab is a very difficult guy to beat if you don't finish him. Umar definitely could find a finish. He does have nice kicks. He has had finishes in the past. I think it's going to be very difficult for Umar to submit Marab. So I think TKO is really his best method of getting a finish. But I don't know. It's a lower weight class, and Umar doesn't have too many finishes under his belt. So I do think Marab's going to be able to win this one, but we'll see. I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever if Umar does find the victory. Yuri and Jamal Hill, I think this is going to be the most exciting fight on the card. I don't think there's too many fights that are even close, to be honest. Both Yuri and Jamal really go for it, especially Yuri. He's extremely wild, unpredictable, throws a lot of shots out there, spinning elbows, spinning wheel kicks, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Yuri's going to throw out some crazy stuff. And I do think in the end, that crazy nature that he does pose in the octagon is going to be a really beneficial factor for him. And I do think he is going to be able to win this fight. I do think he's going to find a second or first or second round TKO on Jamal Hill. I do think Hill could have some moments, but a big test, actually, in my opinion, will be to see if Jamal does land on Yuri, which is very likely. Yuri gets hit a lot. How will Yuri react to it? If he gets knocked out right away, obviously it's over. But even if he gets hurt right away from the first shot that Jamal Hill lands, that's going to be a very bad omen for the rest of the fight. I'm definitely pulling for Yuri. He's a great guy. Is bringing out one of his fans that's a cancer survivor, which is really nice, donating to the charity. And anyways, he's just a very exciting fighter. I do hope he wins. I do think he's going to win, but there obviously are some dangers with Yuri and his fighting style. Just the amount of times that he gets hit to the head obviously is something to think about and worry about, but we'll see. That should be a very, very exciting fight. Almeida Spivak, I think Almeida is going to win. I think Almeida has some sort of a low IQ out there when he lost to Curtis Blades. That was a very low IQ moment for him. But at the end of the day, I do think he's very talented, great wrestler, has an ability to control guys, doesn't always do much with it. As in his Derek Lewis fight, he had top control for 5 rounds and wasn't able to find a finish or even put any damage on Derek Lewis, which is very odd to see. But I do still think Almeida is very talented, great wrestler, and I don't think Spivak's the guy that's going to be able to stop Almeida here. Kevin Holland and DeRitter. Earlier on in the week, I didn't really have a lean either way, but at this point, I do think my lean is Kevin Holland by TKO. DeRitter is just very awkward out there, and he did struggle with Gerald Mearshark a lot, which is not a great sign going forward. Um, and Kevin Holland's a guy, great chin, obviously, a lot of power. The only problem with Kevin Holland is it seems like he doesn't really take his career too seriously, which I don't love. Um, But I do think he'll be able to find a TKO or a KO victory in the second or third round on DeRitter. DeRitter's a decent fighter, but just very awkward out there on the feet. I don't think he's going to have much for Holland. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, my prediction is Holland in that fight. Let's go to the prelims. Peyton Talbot, Barcelos. I made a video about this. I think this is going to be a very interesting fight. A lot of people think Talbot is going to get an early TKO victory over Barcelos, which is definitely possible. But when you look at Barcelos' career, he hung in there with a lot of really good guys. He beat some good guys, he lost to some good guys, but most of his losses are by decision. The only guy that was able to finish him, at least in recent memory, was Umar, and Umar's fighting for the belt in the bantamweight division. Obviously, a very talented fighter. So I think it could be relatively close. I think Talbot's going to win either by a third round TKO or a decision. That would be my prediction. But I think it could be a close fight, a lot closer than many people think. Um, the Zachary Reese fight, I think it's going to be a barn burner. We're going to see an early finish in that one. Um, don't really have a lean either way, but should be a good one. Should definitely be a good one. Guskov, don't really have a lean in this one either. Hopefully it's good. Grant Dawson and Diego Ferreira. I do think this could be a good fight. A lot of Grant Dawson's fights aren't good, but Ferreira is definitely a guy who has a great scrambling ability, has great jiu-jitsu. On the feet, he has knockout power. He knocked out Michael Johnson in one of his more recent fights. And Grant Dawson is a guy who doesn't have much on the feet. So if Ferreira is able to stop the takedowns from Dawson, which is a big if, I do think he's going to have a lot of success on the feet as the fight does progress, and I think he's actually going to find a finish. The big test is going to be to see if Ferreira can stop takedowns. Maybe round one he can't, but round two and round three, if he's able to stop takedowns, I think he's not only going to win, I think he's going to find a finish. Grant Dawson really just does not have much on the feet, and his chin doesn't seem like it's that great, as he did get knocked out with the very first punch that Bobby Green threw, and Bobby Green's not known as a guy that has a ton of power. So yeah, going to the early prelims, I got Carol Rosa here. I don't think Alini Perez is that great, but I'm not going to touch too much more on that fight. Nakamura, I think Nakamura is going to win. I think he's very good. Another nice prospect from Japan. Japan's getting a lot of guys actually starting MMA, coming into the UFC. So that's great. Sopai versus Tercios. Sopai is my prediction. I think he's actually a very good fighter. He did take a really, really bad knockout loss in his last fight with that flying switch knee. But regardless, if you watch that fight back, he was having a lot of success in round one and some of round two. He's a really good fighter, really good wrestler, has some ability on the feet. I think he's very good here. And I do think he's going to be able to beat a guy in Tercios who I'm not too high on, honestly. And here, Tajir, I think Tajir is going to win. Carpenter is a decent fighter, obviously 8-0 prospect, but at the end of the day, I think Tajir is going to win. But yeah, that rounds out the UFC 311 card. I think this should be a pretty good card. I know a lot of people are a little bit disappointed with the main event, how it's Moicano now instead of Arman. And probably the Arman fight would have been better overall, but I do think there was a possibility that it could have been a little bit boring, because sometimes when you see guys, especially wrestlers, like Islam and Arman are, that are extraordinarily good, especially at wrestling, sometimes you can tend to get a little bit of a more boring fight, which may or may not have happened. It might have been a great fight, but I thought there was a possibility it could have been a relatively boring decision victory for Islam. But I guess we'll never know at this point. But that's what we got. We got Moicano. Hopefully Moicano goes for it. I think he will. Moicano should go for it early. It is a very short notice fight. Islam obviously has not prepared for Moicano. Moicano has not prepared for Islam, but he did prepare for Dariush, who is southpaw. So it could possibly help Moicano. Well, it definitely will help Moicano in his preparation for Islam, but it definitely is an uphill climb for Moicano. Now, in terms of who assuming that Islam wins this fight, in terms of who should fight next for the belt, I think it should be Charles Oliveira. Armin obviously did deserve a title shot. He got it. He got hurt. But I think Charles Oliveira deserves it because the same thing happened to him, actually. He did earn another title shot against Islam, a second title shot, but he ended up getting hurt during fight week. And and after that, he was not rewarded another title shot. And in between his loss to Islam, he did lose to Armin, yes, but he also most recently he did beat Michael Chandler in a very dominant 5 round decision victory. Somehow that fight went to a decision. I have no idea how, but regardless, very dominant performance by Charles Oliveira. I think he deserves another title shot. I think he deserved it before the Michael Chandler fight. I didn't even think he needed to fight Armin. I thought he was the rightful next guy, but he decided to fight Armin. Maybe the UFC forced his hand a little bit, ended up losing a very razor close decision. I wouldn't be mad whatsoever if they gave it to Charles. I thought it was very close. Round one, he certainly won. Round two, Armin certainly won. Round three, very close. But I will say Charles was the closest to finishing the fight in that third round. So I wouldn't be mad whatsoever if you gave that third round to Charles. And if Charles won that fight, he'd be fighting Islam right now from the get-go. So I do think Charles deserves a shot next. If Moicano wins, that throws everything off. If Moicano somehow beats Islam Makhachev, they'll probably give Islam an immediate rematch, I would assume. I don't know the date of that, when the date of that would be. It would throw everything off, obviously, but that would just be crazy, crazy scenes if Moicano was somehow able to win. As I said, I don't think so. I think what they do is Islam probably wins this fight, then they give the next title shot to Charles. Probably a little bit later on in the year, Islam doesn't fight too much, and it's even possible that Islam moves up to welterweight after this fight, and Charles doesn't even get a shot. Maybe they do Charles and Armin again for the interim title. I don't know what they're going to do. There's a lot of questions that are left to be answered, but it would be very interesting to see what happens after this card. And obviously, if Moicano wins, that would be extremely interesting to see what happens there. The next thing I want to talk about actually is not related to this fight card, but it's the PFL. I'm not a huge fan of the PFL. I know a lot of guys, a lot of fans here probably are not either, but I just wanted to touch upon this because they made a lot of changes, and I do like a lot of what they were able to do. So they got rid of the point system in their tournament. I still don't like the idea of a tournament, but it's a little bit better now. But one thing that I will say is they made some good changes, some decent changes. But one thing that I think they dropped the ball on a little bit is I think they probably should have kept this tournament fine, but kept it for young up and comers. And maybe they'll end up doing that in the end. I think that's the right move. But in terms of guys who are ranked fighters for them, in terms of guys that are champions or top contenders, I don't think they should be in this tournament. I think fights like that sell themselves. I don't think you should have, for example, in term like for UFC perspective, imagine Islam is in a tournament and he's fighting a bunch of times in a short period. I don't think that makes any sense. I think this should be for young up and comers. I think they should utilize what the UFC has for the Ultimate Fighter and implement it into this tournament style, but don't utilize the reality show. I think the Ultimate Fighter even is not doing well. Nobody really cares about it. But if the PFL was able to utilize this world tournament for young up and comers, maybe give people somewhat of a reason to watch these younger guys that they may not know, I do think it could possibly be some sort of success for them, if you can call it that, because they haven't had much success as of late or really ever. But even if that sort of thing doesn't work for them in terms of ratings, in terms of people watching it, because it probably won't. Not too many people watch PFL anyway. I do think it could be successful for them in finding talent, even if it doesn't do well in terms of revenue or in terms of people watching. If they're able to utilize this to find young talent and possibly down the line, find some good fighters, it could definitely be helpful for them. I do also like that they combine the rosters for Bellator and PFL, make the roster a little bit better. Obviously, that is better. But at the end of the day, I don't think this really changes much, or if anything, to be honest. The UFC is obviously far superior to the PFL in every way. I think it's always going to be like that. And I don't think this changes that much in terms of that. At the end of the day, I think PFL should change their mindset. I don't think they should try to compete with the UFC really at all. I mean, I don't think they'll ever compete with them, but at least for their perspectives, at least for now, don't try to compete with the UFC. You're not going to. They're going to be embarrassed. Especially their event with Francis Ngannou completely bombed. They're obviously nowhere near the UFC or nowhere near a good organization at this point. I think what they should more so focus on is just try to fix a lot of their flaws that they do have. Their broadcasts are terrible. Try to fix all those little things first. Build some sort of a decent company. Have some decent fighters in your league, and try to build that way. Try to build in the long run, and yeah, that's what I think they should do. But that's my little rant on the PFL. But yeah, this is what we have. Uh, crazy news, obviously with Moicano. I still am excited, as I said, for this main event. Hopefully, it turns out well. Um, but we'll see what happens. Probably will be an Islam win, as I said. My prediction: Islam third round TKO. But we'll see what happens. I'm really pulling for Moicano. Hopefully, he's able to pull off a crazy upset. That would be absolutely nuts. But yeah, that caps off this little live stream that we got here. Hopefully, everyone that was here enjoyed it. We'll be back here for another live stream next Friday, hopefully talking about a Moicano win. But anyways, we'll be back next week. Remember, every live stream, a live stream every week, 4 p.m. Eastern. And hopefully we'll see you guys again next week. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed. By the way, look out for a video on Sunday night. A little recap of the UFC event. I'm probably going to be talking about the Yuri and Jamal Hill fight and breaking it down, why I was right or why I was wrong. So be on the lookout for that. My regularly scheduled upload will be on Tuesday at 2 p.m. So be on the lookout for that. And as I said, we'll be back here for another live stream Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern next week. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining, and hope you guys enjoyed. And I'll see you next week. Peace out, boys.